Okay, so we have now sleep trained our second baby, and the only way that I've found that this has been able to work is that it has ended up being that daddy does the sleep training. I have just found that with the first two, I just could not get it to work. I was wanting to nurse them all the time. They were wanting to eat. I was getting so tired and fatigued, and so Dallas just ended up taking it over for me, and it has worked amazing. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we have done with that sleep training, but I need to go find Dallas because he's the one that has done all of the work, and I have just kind of let him take that over. And so we are going to go find him and find out what has been his strategy in making this work. Woo, too bright. Okay, so how did you do it? How did you get our baby to sleep tonight? Because I really had very little to do with it. Basically, you said, okay, I'm doing it tonight. And I said, okay, I'm not interfering. And you took over.
Well, it does make sense in a lot of ways for the dad to do it if he can. It's tricky, like for a lot of people, I would think just because of work schedules and stuff. But the first time we did it, it was on a week break that we were taking. So that was my vacation, right? I was preparing myself for that to be the entirety of what I was going to be doing. Sleep training at night, napping during the day. That was what I was expecting. It didn't actually end up being too bad. And so I was able to do other things as well. But that was what I was prepared for.
And it might sound really hard giving up your holidays to sleep train, but think about how much better you're going to sleep afterwards. You will feel so much better.
I think in both instances, I was the instigator,
You were.
right? Like, that's the other thing.
I think I came to you and it was like I was really frustrated and I was like, I don't know how to do this. This is really frustrating. And so then you were like, I think
Well,
I'm
and it
gonna
was
take
something
this.
that I was thinking about already, right? As the dad, like, I mean, some dads aren't even sleeping in their own bed and they're like, I'm ready for this, right? I'm gonna make it happen. And I think that's totally appropriate.
Ready to
That
have
it's
an emotional life all day.
right. And it's
Ready to have supper when he comes home from work.
you're both probably exhausted. So you're both ready to get sleep, but the dad is oftentimes in a little bit better position rest wise, as far as not having milk and issues that way to actually make it happen. So to prepare for that, I ended up watching probably like 24, 3 videos on different people talking about sleep training. I read multiple articles because I was like, what is this even? How do you even do it? And it was pretty quick that I started to see that there was really only one way that you actually do it and just different ways that you approach it. The patterns started really quick and I was able to get it in my head. So I'm going to explain exactly how to do it and what's involved. But before we actually get into like how to sleep train a baby, one of the first videos I actually came across was not the video I was expecting, but it actually was really helpful because it was how to sleep train a older child. This is a video actually when I watched it, I was like, I wish we'd had this for our first two because we were running into that problem about how do you get this kid to sleep on their own.
Transitioning from co-sleeping to
Yeah, it was really hard on Anya because essentially she had to transition when Trevlin was born and there was no more room in the bed. That was literally it. Trevlin also had difficulty transitioning because we didn't know what we were doing. And there can be a lot of anxiety for those children in terms of being on their own. So how do you help them work through that, get them to stay in their bed? And so this video was actually about that. And it actually was very informative in helping me understand what was happening with younger children as well. And essentially what he said to do was the main problem is anxiety. So you do your bedtime routine, sit with them, you pray with them, whatever you do. And then you say, all right, daddy or mommy is going to go just out the door for 30 seconds and I'll be right back. You stay in bed. And they can stay in bed for 30 seconds, right? So you just leave, you wait 30 seconds, and you come back. You say, how did you do? And if the child is old enough, he recommends you make a chart that tracks how anxious they were. And you just keep doing that. You keep leaving. Now we're going to leave for a minute. And now we're going to leave for 2 minutes. And now we're going to leave for 5 minutes. And now we're going to leave for 10 minutes. And what's going to happen is that their anxiety is going to hit a peak where it can't really get any worse. And it's helping them realize, and us as a parent, because we feel a lot of anxiety when our children feel anxiety. But it's what's the worst that actually happens from anxiety? Well, you hit high anxiety and then nothing happens. Maybe you stay anxious, or maybe it even gets better. And so you're walking with the child through that so that eventually you can have this conversation when you come back. Did anything bad happen? Right? Like, it's okay to feel anxious. You just have to work through it. And I always came back, and eventually you do that in a number of nights in a row, and they will learn that the anxiety didn't actually lead to anything bad happening, and that they can survive through it. And eventually, one of the times you'll be gone and you'll come back and they'll be asleep. Right? And one of the difficult things about sleep training an older child or a baby is that we can't do it for them. Like, we really want to do it for them. And that was also one of the things I was starting to notice it in the videos, but then once we actually did it for ourselves, that really most sleep training methods are actually primarily dealing with the parent's anxiety more so than really doing anything different with the baby, because it's that whole I want to help them go to sleep and I want to do it
You
for
wanna
them.
carry
But
them.
if you carry them, if you do it for them, they'll never learn to go to sleep on their own. There's a spectrum of these different methods of sleep training, all the way from gentle or the no cry methods, which are complete. There is no method where the child does not cry unless it's in the child's personality. Our children would have cried all the time with the gentle methods. The gentle methods, the no cry methods, typically can take up to like a month before they figure it out. That sounds miserable. All the way to the other end of the spectrum, which is called extinction, which is where you just put in earplugs and you just wait the night out. That sounds miserable for me. The anxiety in my as a dad, it's too much for me. I can't do that. And then the only other real other one in there is the what's called wait it out. And wait it out is just wait till your kid gets old enough that they do it on their own and don't want to sleep in your bed anymore, which could be like 12, 15 years old, right? Like, yeah. So one of the things, I don't know if you mentioned this, but we realized is that as we have more kids, waiting it out isn't going to work. Waiting it out only works if you have one, maybe two, right? As soon as you have more, you can't wait it out. We tried essentially to wait it out with Anya, and it didn't work.
Kind of mentioned that in my co-sleeping one, why I quit co-sleeping. So if you're
Yeah.
interested in that, this is part of the reason why, right? You can't wait it out, right?
It doesn't scale, right?
Yeah.
So you have to have one of these, no tier method all the way to extinction, somewhere in between. The middle one, the most famous one, I think is called the Faber method. So as I said, you can't do it for them, but what you can do is you can kind of hold their hand in a sense and walk with them through it. Essentially what they need to learn to do, and you need to train them to do, is to self-soothe, right? They've got anxiety, they've got emotions happening, and they need to learn how to regulate those emotions so that they can calm themselves down and go to sleep, because that's what they've learned to do either when they're nursing or when they're sleeping on your shoulder. They've developed a need for supports to go to sleep, like essentially a crutch, that they need this crutch in order to go to sleep. They can only go to sleep when they're nursing, or they can only go to sleep when they're rocking, and to some degree you can't really ever totally get rid of those things. We all sleep better in certain situations, and those things might be what you could call a crutch, but we can transition those to more healthy things. And sometimes some parents like to just create new ones. They'll put a blanket, a blanket or some toy that's always with them, something that is consistent. Whatever consistent thing you do is going to be the new pattern, the new routine. That's the new pattern you're transitioning them to so they can go to sleep. So essentially you want to start with some sort of like bedtime routine. A bedtime routine just helps even at, 4 months, 5 months old, which is kind of as early as you probably want to think about sleep training. Some people historically, have done it earlier, so it is possible. But 4 or 5 months, something happens in the development of the baby's brain where they now can do light sleep. And before that, they only do REM or they do deep sleep, and the light sleep doesn't bridge the difference, and so they're always waking up at night. And after 4 months, the brain develops, and now they can do this bridge sleep in between. So now they're not waking up as much at night, which is very helpful with the sleep training. So that's where a lot of people like to start. But even
the other part I was going to say that is that just that you want to make sure that they have enough weight before you really try to push it, and because then you don't know, okay, are they hungry or are they actually just needing to go back to bed?
Yeah, our understanding is minimum 8 pounds, right?
So 9 pounds.
9 pounds, minimum 9 pounds. Obviously, at 4 months. They should weigh a lot more than that. So
But they
they are
also
now,
start to sleep regress at 4 months, so it's more motivating to try to do it at
y-
that time too, right?
yeah,
Because
there's a
they wake
sleep
up
regression that
easier.
happens at 4 months anyway. And so it's a good time. It's just a
Mhm.
natural time to reprogram exactly what's normal in life. And part of that bedtime routine is also making sure that they've had a really good feed, so that
Mhm.
they're very full. They're not going to be hungry right away. That we found that that's really important. That's really helpful
Mhm.
to getting them to sleep for a long period at night.
Mhm. Sometimes even, like, just a little bit of cluster feeding
Yeah,
in the evening, right?
leading up to it. Yeah, they like to cluster feed and just leaning into that, making sure they're really,
Cool.
really full so
Mhm.
that they're not hungry at night.
Mhm.
So you start with a sleep routine, a bedtime routine, and even at 4 months, 5 months, they start to see the pattern. And
Mhm.
usually, for most people, that's something like reading them a story, singing them a song. Maybe some people like to give them a bath every night.
Mhm.
Something that's just, and it's just consistent. You try and do that all the time. It helps them wind down. Or the one thing that stood out to me with that was that you don't want to do this in the dark.
Mm.
So you actually want to do it with the lights on. Like the lights can be dim, kind of
Mhm.
a nighttime, just a lamp on or something is what I like to do. But you don't want it to be dark because you want the dark to actually be part of that new trigger that it's
Right.
sleeping time. And so once you turn off the lights, they need to learn how to sleep on their own at that point, and it becomes a trigger. Okay, the lights are off. Now I need to go to sleep. The lights are on. I'm getting ready for bed, right?
Mhm.
And it will just kind of help prep them for what's coming and help them get ready, help them know that, okay, now it's time to go to bed. And the other thing that you're looking for is ideally, if you were to kind of rank your baby from, totally awake to at a 1 to 10 being they're like almost asleep, basically asleep.
Mhm.
You want to aim to put them down into their bed at like 50% is the ideal. If they're too awake, it's going to be hard for them to go to sleep. If they're too asleep, they still may attach I need to be rocked till I'm almost asleep before I can go to bed as part of their comfort routine. And you don't want that. You want more flexibility than that. You want them to have more ability to go to sleep than that.
Mhm.
So 50% is the ideal. With Caden, I could get there, and
Mhm.
I like to cheat. I would go like 65, 70% most of the time. With Leland, he's either awake or he's asleep. I don't know how you tell. So
And I'm just you're saying all this, and I'm like, some of the stuff you told me, some of it, but I'm like, feel like I'm learning as you're saying this, and I'm like, I just wrecked it last night because like he was fussy, and I was like, I can't do it. And I think you were distracted doing something else, and so I went and got him, and I was like, I'm just gonna rock him for a bit, and totally wrecked that.
the main most important thing is consistently that you deal with the baby in terms of how you're comforting them and how you're coming putting them down is consistency. And
Right.
when you jump out of routine, that can very quickly lead to an accidental programming of a new routine. So when things fall out of routine, it's helpful to look back and go, all right, did we do this by accident somehow, or are they just in a natural sleep regression? Even how you lay them down. I like to always lay them down on their back because then if they flip onto their stomach, that's their choice. But if you lay them down on your stomach, you need to always lay them down on your stomach because if you need to lay them down on your back, always lay them down on your back because it's just that consistency that we're dealing with is the same, and
Mhm.
they can get back into okay, this is how it works. So jumping back to what you do after you set them down in their bed, you've prepped yourself mentally that it may take a while. You may not get much sleep tonight. It's important for as the parent, in my opinion, to mentally prepare yourself, steel yourself. There's going to be a lot of crying. I might be up a lot tonight. I'm going to be scrolling a lot of whatever I scroll or reading a book or watching a movie or something because I might be up a lot at night. I don't want to be up and down personally.
Mhm.
So I've prepared myself and I leave. And in most cases, because they're not used to this, they're going to start crying right away. But what you want to do is you want to have some sort of progressive schedule of how frequently you allow yourself to check on them. So usually that's going to be that the first night you're going to wait 5 minutes. You're going to set a timer on your phone, on your watch. Wait 5 minutes before you allow yourself to go back in.
Which feels like
And that's
forever.
going to feel like forever. And you will go back in, you will comfort them however you can do that. With Caden, if I was going to comfort him, I had to pick him up. There was no comforting him laying down in the crib, in the playpen. He was that was not going to work.
And he was close to a year at that point.
Yeah, and ideally you
Mhm.
pick him up, you soothe them, and
Mhm.
Caden was a lot older when we actually got around to this.
Caden was about a year, Leland was 5 months, so
Yeah. You pick them up, you stop them from crying. Caden, I could not stop from crying. He just kept crying. So I would soothe him, reassure him that I was there, that I was close by, and then I would lay them back in. Ideally not crying, but if they're going to cry for half an hour, then you just lay them down after a few minutes. And then you go back out and you wait another 5 minutes. And then you just repeat that until they fall asleep. Ideally, the first night, it's going to be something like you wait 5 minutes and then you do a 10-minute, and then you maybe do a 15-minute, and then every time after that, it's 15-minute waiting. If they wake up in the middle of the night crying, you wait 5 minutes or you go and check. Now, obviously, if there's like something, so obviously, like in our day and age, like everybody's got little screens, you can check and make sure they're actually okay. There's nothing dangerous going on. These also, I think, are a huge problem because you sit there, it makes that 5 minutes last way longer when you can see them crying, right? It's, check, make sure they're okay, put it face down, and don't look until 5 minutes or because it's just too painful. But the first night's going to be something like that, 5, 10, 15, cap it at 15. And the second night, you're going to go 5, 10, 15, maybe wait 20 minutes after that. Third night, you're going to start at 10. And then you're going to jump to 12, 15, whatever that is. So it just, each night it gets longer out. And when they wake up in the night, you follow a similar protocol. What you're going to find is when you time that, looking back on my logs for Caden and for Leland, the first night they both didn't make it to 5 minutes. And that's shocking to me because like, how is that even possible, right? Every time they woke up, they were back asleep within 5 minutes. Maybe they were a little bit more tired, but even the second night, that was the case. Part of it is that having that timer and tracking it and forcing yourself to wait that extra time, we feel like time's going a lot faster. And that's part of where I realized that a lot of this is actually to soothe us as parents. The baby's fine. They're figuring it out. We are anxious on their behalf.
Like
and
when our baby's co-sleeping, often they just make a little cry, and I'm like, oh no, they're hungry, and wake up and start feeding them. And half the time you wake them, they don't actually need food.
Yeah.
But you're just too quick to jump in, right?
Yeah. And some parents will even find, like with Caden, I found pretty quickly, I actually extended that amount of time I was waiting pretty quick because I found that for him, me going in and actually comforting him was more distressing. He picked up energy every time I went in, and I was like, you know what? He does better when I'm not there. I'm still going to go in because I can't help myself every once in a while. But with Leland, I can rub his back and he just settles right down. So I don't mind going in every 5 minutes. I'm not disrupting him. I'm not keeping him up. I'm not making him awake longer. So you can feel out your child that way. You might find that they would do better if you're there less. And the other thing I would really recommend you do is you keep a journal for the first week, maybe 2 weeks. I find I usually quit journaling about day 6, maybe day 5, where I just track their sleep entirely. I say, this is when I set them down. This is when I last heard them crying. They're asleep at this point. I go, okay, that was this long. Then I track how long they slept. I track when they woke up. I write it all down because that actually gives me a lot of perspective because you wake up in the morning, you're like, I feel miserable. That was awful. And you look at the log and you're like, oh, they got 10 hours of sleep and they were awake for 15 minutes all night, cumulatively. There is an exception though. Usually our babies will have at least one night, maybe two. I think Leland had one. I think Caden had two, where they would cry for about an hour. So you are going to probably have one time where they try to fight you out and say, no, I like the old system. I like it when you rock me to sleep. I like to go to sleep to milk. I want that. And that can take half an hour to an hour, sometimes a little longer. And
with that, you're still saying though you're going in every 5 minutes.
You're still checking,
soothing on them. Your 10 minutes. It's not like you're just letting them cry for an hour.
Yeah, go in and soothe them if you can. Yeah, you're still doing that. And for both Leland and Caden, that happened like the second or third night, later in the night, after they'd been sleeping for like 3 hours. It wasn't when we first set them down. They woke up in the middle of the night and they wanted that. With Leland, we've had to be a little bit more aware of like going, okay, and Kaden actually was nursing at the same time too. So we were like, okay, we know he technically can go
I
through the
know he
night,
can do more than 3 hours. Like,
but
I
we
feel like
also
it
want to
was
ease him
mental.
into it if because he's been used to eating all night. Like he's not
Yeah.
eating enough during the day. So we're gonna go, okay, about 3 to 5, we're gonna give him one feeding, and then if he wakes up after 6, he's probably gonna eat again. After 6 o'clock, babies generally don't have enough sleep pressure to put themselves back to sleep. And so it's not really ideal to try and sleep train them after 6 o'clock in the morning. If they keep sleeping, to 8 o'clock, that's great. But if they wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning, you might just be up. Maybe they'll take an early nap. And just to be aware of that, I think that's an important thing to be aware of as
So
well.
I would think what I was just gonna say in that is that so like for the first bit, it was kind of like if it had been 3 hours and he was crying, we're like, okay, maybe let's try nursing him, seeing if he's
Yeah,
hungry. But then if he's like up again in an hour, it's like, okay, we're gonna let him cry it out for 5 minutes, see if he can put himself back to sleep. And like
yeah,
he's not
yeah.
hungry, he doesn't need to eat again, right?
And especially that first week, maybe ideally up into the second week, I'm the one getting up out of bed, going and getting him, bringing him to Jill. I'm doing the moving of the baby around because I don't have uh, hormones and milk and things that are happening in my body that are going to tempt me to get off the path.
Yeah,
And um,
that's very fair. That's very
right, that's happening usually about halfway through or early into week 2. I get exhausted and Jill just takes over because
Well, I
I'm
hear him anyways, right?
yeah
So I'm awake.
yeah. And so ideally, you're not getting up the first week, and by the end of the second week you're doing it all again, but you're doing it with way more energy. And I'm able to get my sleep again.
Right.
Right, that's kind of the way it's worked.
And this has been, I'm trying to think, about 2 weeks now, and there has been quite a few days where he has basically eaten once in the night and he's gone 12 hours, like gone to bed at
Hmm.
8, gone up at 8, and he's fed once. And that's been quite a few times within 2 weeks of trying to sleep train.
Yeah,
And like last night, I think he was up 3 times, but he only ate once. He cried for like 5 minutes and put himself back to sleep.
yeah,
The other two,
yeah.
right?
And so there's just two more things I want to mention that I think are important to know in the context of as you're sleep training. And the first one is that naps and sleeping at night apparently are a different part of the brain. So it's often not recommended that you try and do sleep training and nap training at the same time. Nap training is a little bit different because it's just a different part of the brain that's operating. And so you can still nurse the baby to sleep, rock them to sleep during the day for naps, and not wreck your sleep training at night. That's my understanding. That seems to be what's happened with Leland. We sleep trained at night and he was instant. We'll
Say
try
that
that
again.
again. Yeah. With Caden, we sleep trained at night and he was instantly taking his naps on his own
Yeah.
through the day, no problem. It was amazing.
Mhm.
We just lay him down and he went to sleep.
Mhm.
So it seemed to work in conjunction, but
Mhm.
they say it's not. At least my understanding is that they're not connected, so you don't have to stress about trying to make sure you're doing all this for a nap time as well.
Well, and that helps me too because I feel like, okay, if I have to put him down for night, I have to let him sleep on his own, but then I can hold him and snuggle him during the day,
Yeah, that's
right?
one of the things you reassure yourself with
Mhm.
every time coming up to it, right? Is that it's going to be difficult through the night, but you're going to make up for it with lots of snuggles during the day
Yeah.
so that they still feel secure and all those kinds of things. And just re-emphasizing that consistency at night is really important. I've heard that some parents might worry about like attachment issues
Mhm.
that can happen, and that the inconsistency is actually where that comes from.
Mm.
So being consistent in how you respond to the child, how you you interact with them. Like if some nights you're just picking them up and feeding them, other nights you're rocking to sleep, and then other nights you're just laying them down. That's not going to work, right?
No.
The other thing is regressions. Expect a sleep regression maybe every month to month and a half. There's always going to be sleep regressions. There's going to be certain things that are happening developmentally in their mind and their brain as they grow. And sometimes those sleep regressions aren't developmental. Sometimes they're things like you go on a camping trip,
Mhm.
or there's a party that was up really late, and certain things, or you get into a bad habit by accident.
People get sick,
Yeah,
right?
people get sick, things like that. Those things just happen in life. So
Mhm.
every month and a half, you're going to have life events or a developmental issue. Not really an issue. It's good they're growing.
Mhm.
That that causes some sort of sleep regression, and you just deal with that by going back to your consistent pattern of how you deal with sleeping. And it's going to be going back to doing the sleep training again, except that when you do it again, it's going to be so much easier. It's not going to be a week. It's not going to be, multiple hour-long cryouts. It's going to be pretty quick, generally, right? They're going to pick up, oh yeah, okay, I remember this now. And it might be a little bit of a struggle for them, but now you've been practiced as a parent. You know how to expect. You know that they're going to survive. They're going to be happier at the end of it, because that's the thing that we found both times, is that almost immediately they're so much happier and they're so much more rested. Leland seems to have actually gained weight since.
I was worried about him not getting enough, because I'm like, I'm not nursing him every 2 hours a
Yeah.
day.
Yeah,
Like nursing him once, and I'm like, he's chunkier.
he's
Everybody's
eating.
been saying he's chunkier. And I'm
He's
like, okay,
chunkier. He's probably had a
makes me feel
growth
better.
spurt. He's probably taller
Yeah.
than he was. He's eating longer and he's eating better than he was before. So
Yeah.
they need their sleep. And once you do it, you'll become convinced of it, and it won't be that hard when they do have a regression to go, okay, no, we're going back to this
Yeah.
because it's really important, and it's not too hard.
The only other thing I was going to say then is that you want to make sure that you really want them to get that good solid sleep at night, that their naps aren't too long during the day. Like that's one when we've been running into. He's been sleeping better, so then he's been taking a little bit longer naps too. And then the
Yeah.
longer naps, like 2 hour naps, too close to bedtime, have been affecting his sleep pressure.
Yeah,
then
and
he's
that's
not doing well. So I was
that's
like, okay, we
something
gotta
you've
cut
added
back-
on this time to
cut
that
back a little
to that
bit
journal.
more.
I've been keeping the nighttime journal, but you were also tracking their daytime naps. And those daytime nappings, then you're kind of like, okay, seeing the holistic picture of how much are they sleeping, and going, is it really realistic to expect them to sleep this long, right? How much sleep do they actually need?
Yeah.
And going, oh, okay, well, the reason that it was hard tonight was because
Because he
They've-
slept for 2+ hours and woke up at 5, and then
Yeah.
expect him to go to bed at
or they're waking up
8.
really early. It's
Yeah.
because they've been napping really long, things like that. So
Mhm.
just analyzing the patterns, getting a big picture, sometimes zooming out, and
Because sometimes you feel like they're waking up all the time, they're not getting them sleep, and then you start calculating. You're like, oh, it's been 14 hours, between all the naps and and you're like, that's what they're supposed to get, right? So,
yeah, I guess they shouldn't be sleeping longer, right?
that he'd wake up from a nap after half an hour, and I'd be like, what? It's only been half an hour. But then once I realized he's getting 12 hours at bedtime, he only needs 2 hours, so 4 half-an-hour naps in the day is totally fine, right?
Yeah.
And then I'm not trying to put him back to sleep, right?
And now you know everything you need to know.
No
You're an expert.
excuses. No excuses.
No excuses. Put that baby to sleep.
And don't get upset if your husband doesn't do it for you. No, I think this will be really valuable, because I know you were saying, in the amount of videos that you watched, I was asking you beforehand, I was like, were any of these daddy sleep training videos? And you couldn't really think of it. And to me, it just seems of course, it's so much easier for the dad to do it. But I don't know, we think the mom has to do it all the time. And I don't like that. Don't want to put pressure on your relationship or anything in this, but this may be one of the only dad sleep training videos out there, and it has worked really well for us.
If you have any questions,
We're experts.
yeah, that's right. It's not really. I've watched a bunch of videos. I can talk to you from experience. We'll answer your questions in the comments if you have any questions about something that we may have missed.